Clemson and Notre Dame have struck a huge non-conference scheduling agreement. Quite frankly, the type of agreement we haven't seen in years and years, maybe ever. Not a home and home, or a home and home with a neutral in Atlanta like you've seen before. This is a 12-year scheduling agreement that starts right after Clemson concludes their home and home with LSU, and Notre Dame coincidentally will also conclude their last scheduled games with Southern Cal, and then in 2027. Notre Dame will come to Clemson, and then they'll rotate all the way through 2038. So it's 12 games with a true home and home on-campus games between Clemson and Notre Dame starting 2027. My initial reaction to that was not one of exuberant enthusiasm, and I shared a link to the news to a Clemson fan and a friend, and his text was bleh, right? And, compared to what we've had in the past, where the past couple of years, or more than a couple of years, going back to 2011, Clemson has played Auburn 4 times, 2011, 2012, 16, 17. They played A&M in 18 and 19, so twice. They played Notre Dame 4 times in the regular season. They played Georgia 4 times. So you have some variety, maybe not a perfect amount of variety. Maybe there's no Tennessee and Florida and Oklahoma and Texas in there like fans would probably like to see, but at least some semblance of variety, and that's gone. Now, looking forward, pretty much every season you can count on, as much as the ACC schedule is shifting around, Clemson fans can count on Florida State as the only annual ACC rival they have. Georgia Tech and NC State are now sadly off of that docket, rotating. So they will not play those teams every year. So you have Florida State from the ACC, you have South Carolina in the Palmetto Bowl, and now you have Notre Dame. Those are the 3. That's the core of the Clemson schedule moving forward. And so there's a little bit of kind of weird adjustment for that, right? Like I still miss Georgia Tech Clemson. For me, the first Clemson game I ever went to was the 2006 Georgia Tech game where C.J. Spiller had that famous juke move that just dropped two Georgia Tech defenders on the ground, and he ran that long touchdown. And that was sort of me like deciding I'm going to Clemson, I'm all in. First road game I ever went to was 2007, where they lost on the road to Georgia Tech in a game that was just a bunch of field goals. So 06, 07 was kind of my start of that rivalry for me. And I didn't miss a Clemson Georgia Tech game home or road until COVID. So that's a special one to me. And it died this last season. It returns now, but it being annual died. And same with NC State, always one of the teams that had the most kind of passion for, or I guess I would say most passion against NC State. Whereas Notre Dame, I certainly don't like them, but I don't really have any particular vitriol or animosity towards them. It's just a good program I respect. But I think for a lot of reasons, this makes a lot of sense. So looking ahead, over those 12 years, Clemson was already going to play Notre Dame 5 times. So those 5 don't change. You're really talking about the other 7. So who did Clemson have in those other 7 years? Well, one of them wasn't filled. So there's 6 other years, really. 4 of those games are the Bulldogs. I'll pull this up. The Georgia Bulldogs were scheduled for a home and home in 29 and 30, and then again in 32 and 33. So those likely going to go off the board. I can't imagine, especially in 2029, where Clemson has 5 non-conference games scheduled. One of them's got to go. It's not going to be Notre Dame or South Carolina. Furman is the kind of traditional FCS team they always play. East Carolina is the traditional, not Power 5, but still FBS team they always play. Seems like Georgia's going to be the one out. I would expect that to also be canceled in 2030, and then I would expect the home and home to be gone in 2032 and 33, unless Clemson wants to play 3 major non-conference games, which seems unlikely. What's not shown here is that in 35 and 36, they were going to play Oklahoma. Now, that's a long way out. You're talking a decade out. Would those games have actually happened? I would have loved to see Clemson, Oklahoma, but I think what Clemson is safeguarding themselves against is the SEC going to 9 games, not wanting to play 9 really tough conference games in a really tough SEC. And then does Oklahoma really want to go play Clemson after that? Probably not. So this locks Clemson in to guarantee they've got their 2 marquee kind of bookmarks of the schedule, or bookends, or marquee just notes, cornerstones of the schedule, I guess you'd say. You're going to play Notre Dame. You're going to play South Carolina. Every year you're guaranteed 1 big-time home game. Florida State hopefully steps up and kind of provides you a second big-time home game. And then between the rest of the ACC, hopefully you at least have 2 really good home games every season. So this is huge for stability. There's also some thoughtfulness to it beyond that. So before I move off of that, every year you can expect Clemson to play. They'll play this home and home against LSU. And then beyond that, you'll see Notre Dame, South Carolina, an FCS opponent. So currently scheduled, we have Furman, the Citadel, Wofford, and Charleston Southern. To see one of those, and then a lower level FBS opponent. Right now we have Troy, Georgia Southern, and ECU on the docket. I think that's what that's more or less the formula for Clemson's non-conference schedule. Now, where I think this gets really smart, where Graham Neff really hit a home run, is in this brand initiative. So if you've been paying attention, you've heard that the ACC has now, pretty much as a result of Florida State and Clemson's lawsuit, agreed that 60% of the TV revenue will be allocated based on TV ratings. So if Clemson's drawing millions and millions of fans and no one's watching, let's say Wake Forest, not to pick on them, but let's just say Wake Forest, for example, they're not going to just split that revenue equally. 40% of all TV revenue will be shared equally. And then the 60%, the bigger chunk, will be based on how many people watched. And Clemson was not number one last year. It was actually Georgia Tech in large part because they had that marquee game against Florida State in Ireland, right? So it's not always Clemson by far every year. Clemson needs to schedule games like a big game against Notre Dame. That's going to help draw the eyeballs. Not only that, but for Notre Dame, they benefit because this counts as one of those 5 games they're contracted to play with the ACC. So now this is a win-win for Clemson and Notre Dame, in that Notre Dame, they're going to have fewer games against teams like Syracuse. In 2028, they have games against NC State, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. One of those is probably going to get dropped for this Clemson game, who wasn't on the docket that year. Probably Syracuse or NC State, which are road games. Right, so that's making their schedule more attractive, giving them more control. For Clemson, there's double benefit there. Not only do you guarantee yourself a big-time opponent, but you're also knocking that off the docket of another ACC team who could benefit from the ratings that Notre Dame generates. So let's say Syracuse would have played them, had big ratings, and eaten up more of the pie. Well, now Syracuse might schedule Northern Illinois. That's not going to get very many ratings. So you're essentially pulling money that Syracuse would have taken from the pie and pulling that over to Clemson. So it's a double win. Now, Notre Dame isn't doing this out of pure charity. Notre Dame's got some benefits going their way as well. Obviously, having good opponents is a big one. But what was coming down the pike for them is after 2026, so they have 2 more years, it sounds like Southern Cal was planning to cancel their annual game against Notre Dame, which honestly is a bummer. That's a classic American college football rivalry. So I don't celebrate that at all. It's bad for the sport. I hate that. But it wasn't done because of this. This Clemson-Notre Dame agreement was done because that was coming. Jennifer Cohen, the AD at Southern Cal, said, we're playing in a conference where we fly back and forth across the country every week. And she went on to say, we're going to evaluate what's best for our student athletes in our program. And if we're being honest, it's probably not best for them to play in the Big Ten where they're flying all over the place. That ship has sailed. They're already in that conference for the money. But then do they really want to fly back again to the Midwest every other year to play Notre Dame? Or would they rather just host Fresno State, right? You already have a tough enough schedule moving from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. You could probably just host Fresno State and call it a day, right? Pick up a win, save the flight. It does make sense for them. So with that going away, Notre Dame has a slot where they've got to fill it with, a marquee name. They've got Navy contracted on the schedule. They've got, some of these lesser ACC teams on the schedule. And they do have some games in the future that are very attractive. Wisconsin and Green Bay in Lambeau next year. They've got Texas several years down the road. But they need more of that. And so Clemson helps them fill that void while also knocking out an NC State, a Wake Forest, a Cal, a Syracuse, programs where they don't want to travel there and they'd rather not host them. They'd rather make that a marquee game. So it's a win-win for them. They've got the slot opening with Southern Cal likely dropping off. And this could replace a Wake Forest with a marquee game and allow them to go schedule someone they want to schedule. So, personally, I would most like to see Clemson play a variety of non-conference opponents like Tennessee, Ole Miss, Florida, Oklahoma. Those are teams I'd really want to see Clemson play annually. That's off the table now, but it wasn't honestly on the table before that. It was pretty much Georgia and Notre Dame, and you're basically just replacing Georgia with more Notre Dame. And frankly, I'm thrilled about that. I don't want to play Georgia. Clemson has a really ugly record against Georgia, and I don't think it's a loser mentality to just acknowledge that, Clemson's lost, I think it's 7 of 8. They've struggled immensely. Georgia's really the only team historically that has more or less been dominant against Clemson. Georgia holds a 44-18-4 record against Clemson, and Georgia's won 7 of the last 8. Memorably, Clemson won in 2013 in the Taj Boyd versus Aaron Murray game. I'd honestly rather play Notre Dame. That game's going to draw the same kind of ratings. Maybe it doesn't have the same local feel and more traditional feel, but I think Clemson's got a better than 50% chance to win that. And historically, that is just, I think you just can't say that's the case about playing Georgia. So they get an equally attractive but more winnable game there. They lock it in. It's a little bit more stable with the SEC controlling so much of Georgia's schedule and them already having a ACC opponent that they need to play with Georgia Tech. So if that conference ever goes to 9 games, those games would have died anyway. So I think it locks in Clemson having an attractive schedule. It blocks other teams in the ACC from kind of benefiting from the Notre Dame TV ratings draw. And frankly, it gets Clemson out of playing Georgia. So pretty much from every angle, this is a masterstroke by Graham Neff for the Clemson Tigers. Here's one last look at the schedule. So again, 25 and 26 not affected. That's the LSU home and home. And you kind of see the formula there with big-time non-conference opponent, which beyond 26 is pretty much always Notre Dame. Then you have Troy and Georgia Southern. There's your FBS team that's not major, but it's above FCS. And you have Furman, you have Georgia Southern, there's your FCS lot, and then you have the Palmetto Bowl, which I do not believe is in danger because of this. And that you see that trend continue with Notre Dame taking the spot of LSU. For the 12 years that follow, I'm just showing the 8 here. So let me know what you think in the comments. My initial reaction was not super excited, but looking into it further, I think it's a brilliant move. I think it's a win-win. Really appreciate it if you could like this video, if you could subscribe to this channel. As always, go Tigers.